So we have other apostles and disciples, and it's always difficult to figure out the difference between an apostle and disciple even in the scripture. Sometimes everyone's being called disciples, other times they're being called apostles. But as it pans out, according to the way Eusebius now is presenting it to us, there are 70 disciples for the 70 nations of the world, the 70 language groups, if you want, that the Hebrews thought there were 70 nations, and that's basically how the disciples are presented, though all 70 disciples are never given us, and I doubt if they ever existed. But that's the scheme that has emerged, whether that's really what it was or just two words for the same thing, which the Gospel of John keeps calling everyone disciples and doesn't seem to call anyone apostles at all, and never does list all of the apostles. And the only apostle lists as such are given in the synoptics, and they don't agree totally with each other. One of the characters they don't agree about is Thaddeus. I'll get to him in a moment. Look at this, though. Sosthenes. And also in St. Paul's epistle to the Galatians, Sosthenes, who sent letters with Paul to the Corinthians, is said to have been one of these. Sosthenes. Yes, Paul does address Corinthians to, or mention Sosthenes in, I think, Corinthians, since he is at Corinth. But guess what? When the book of Acts comes to write about what happens to Paul at Corinth, Sosthenes is the one who wants to whip him and beat him at the altar. Sosthenes is presented as the leader of the synagogue. So we either have two Sosthenes in Corinth, which I doubt, two Jewish people called Sosthenes, or the book of Acts is just too crudely picked up information from Paul and transformed it into something else. And you'll have to look at that when we come to it. I just mentioned this Sosthenes here is now considered even a disciple. In the book of Acts, he's Paul's enemy. You say, well, that's just a different Sosthenes. Well, yeah, except maybe it's in the same town, Corinth. So I kind of doubt if it's a different Sosthenes. I think Acts is up to its usual tricks, or not really being forthcoming or understanding the material it's dealing with. In any case, we also talk about Clement in another book, speaking about Cephas as Peter. And that Paul in Galatians talks about a Cephas and also talks about a Peter. And a lot of people say, oh, well, he's talking about the same person, but some people think he may be talking about two different people because he's mentioning them in about the space of 10 different lines. He says, I think he says, and the pillars of the church were James, Cephas, and John. And Cephas, and then about 3 lines further on, he says, when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face. He doesn't call him Cephas. And earlier he speaks about only seeing Peter when he went up to Jerusalem. Then he talks about the pillars being James, Cephas, and John. So a lot of people have said, well, Peter and Cephas are the same. And I agree, I think they're supposed to be. But some people think they're different. And he says here that Clement, in his book, says that Cephas was a disciple, not an apostle. Now, Cephas, in Aramaic, means rock. And Peter, in Greek, means rock. So people say the two are the same. And John makes it clear. He says, Peter, I will call you Cephas. So he wants people to understand that there's no difference between Peter and Cephas, or Cephas if you prefer. But anyway, Eusebius is raising the issue here. And Matthias, who was elected after Judas Iscariot's evaporation, shall we say, for the moment, I'm not sure if he's putting, he was numbered with the apostles in place of Judas, but he was also one of the 70, I think he said. And Thaddeus too. Now Thaddeus may be an apostle, may be a disciple, or maybe there's no difference between them. The problem is that if you go to the apostle lists, and we don't have time to do that probably in this class, I don't have it in front of me, but if I remember correctly, Matthew says Lebbaeus, who was surnamed Thaddeus. Mark doesn't mention a Lebbaeus, just has Thaddeus as one of the 12. So here we have another weird name here. Barnabas Thaddeus. And Luke doesn't have Thaddeus. In place of Thaddeus, Luke has Judas of James. Judas of James. Meaning either Judas the son of James or Judas the brother of James. Most people think it's Judas the brother of James. The same person who's writing the letter of Jude, who calls himself Judas the brother of James. So now we're getting into real problems, because Judas the brother of James, if James is the brother of Jesus, then Judas is also the brother of Jesus. So there's a lot of ramifications. I deal with in my James the brother of Jesus book, pretty detailed if you find those sections, and I think I present everything I have to say about it. I can't do it at the moment, we will do it as we go along. So Thaddeus is another person to keep an eye on. We will have material here in Eusebius that Thaddeus goes down to Antioch and is involved in the conversion of this king there. And that Judas Thomas, or Thomas, is involved in it too. And we know from other documents that Thomas is called Judas Thomas. I think it's in the, I get it confused sometimes, but certainly in the Gospel of Thomas, he's called the words of Didymus Judas Thomas. Didymus Judas Thomas. The reason, I don't know why the Judas drops out in normative scripture. In Mark and John, he's Didymus Thomas. But in fact, John has got to be wrong there, because what we have there is, again, confusion of two languages. Toma in Aramaic is twin, and Didymus in Greek is twin. So basically his name is Twin Twin, the same as Peter's name is Rock Rock. But, you know, that's because the writers are a little bit confused with their data and don't know the languages that they might ordinarily know. And when we find out who Judas is the twin of, I mean, who the twin is, that he's Judas the twin Judas Thomas. And we have a lot of material written in the name of Judas Thomas. Therefore, we have another Judas. Now, how is he different from Judas of James or Thaddeus? I'm not sure he is. And there's another character that pops up in the Nag Hammadi scrolls called Theudas. And Theudas also pops up in the Josephus materials,